Let's be honest, if sarcasm were an Olympic sport, Gen X would have swept the podium by now. But have you ever stopped to wonder why this generation, the so-called forgotten middle child between boomers and millennials, mastered the art of biting wit, ironic detachment, and dark, bone-dry humor? It's not just style, it's survival. While everyone's been obsessed with millennial burnout and Gen Z anxiety, Gen X has been quietly cracking jokes in the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes rolling, trust issues intact. Raised as latchkey kids in the shadow of Cold War dread, economic uncertainty, and a boom in broken homes, Gen X didn't just develop cynical humor, they needed it. It wasn't just a way to laugh, it was a way to cope. And yet, this sarcastic generation is still misunderstood. Their emotional detachment gets labeled cold, their ironic jokes misread as apathy. But what if I told you that behind all that dry, deadpan delivery lies something deeper? Something that reveals a powerful form of psychological resilience? In this video, we're peeling back the layers of Gen X's humor, from the disillusionment it masks to the pain it processes. Because once you understand the psychology behind their sarcasm, you may start to see their smirks a little differently. The latchkey childhood, where the walls were quiet but the TV was loud. For Gen X, childhood often meant coming home to an empty house and flipping on the TV instead of being greeted by a parent. These latchkey kids weren't just independent, they were forced to be. It wasn't rebellion, it was routine. They learned early that vulnerability wasn't always safe, and silence often said more than words ever could. This shaped a Gen X worldview that relied on emotional self-preservation, an instinct that shows up later in their ironic detachment and sarcastic humor. Without a steady adult presence, many Gen Xers turned to sitcoms, dark comedies, and stand-up specials to fill the emotional gaps. Humor became both a companion and a defense mechanism. Think about it. When your emotional support system is Seinfeld or The Simpsons, your default language becomes witty comebacks and dry commentary. It's not just cynical humor for laughs, it's psychological armor. This is where sarcasm and trauma begin to walk hand in hand. This early exposure to the absurdities of adult life without the tools to process them bred a sharp observational skill, one that noticed hypocrisy, flaws, and contradictions. And what better outlet for that than sarcastic humor? Gen X humor isn't random, it's reflexive. It's how they learn to speak their truth while deflecting pain. And that skill didn't vanish with childhood, it morphed into a worldview. One we'll see echoing in how Gen Xers relate to authority, relationships, and even their own mental health. Sarcasm as a shield. The unspoken language of emotional survival. By the time Gen X entered adulthood, sarcasm wasn't just a punchline, it was a strategy. It's what you use when showing emotion feels risky, and vulnerability has historically backfired. For many Gen Xers, being real meant being disappointed. So instead, they got clever. Sarcasm explained their frustration without exposing their fear. Dry humor psychology isn't about cruelty, it's about control. And for Gen X, control was a luxury they had to craft from chaos. Take relationships, for instance. Instead of saying, "I'm scared to get close," a Gen Xer might joke, "Commitment. I'd rather sign up for jury duty." It lands as humor, but underneath it's a whisper of trauma, of generational wounds still stitched with irony. Humor as coping isn't just a theory, it's lived reality. You'll notice that behind many Gen X jokes lies a quiet echo of disillusionment, a subtle shake of the head that says, "I've seen too much to take anything at face value." What's brilliant and brutal is how this sarcasm builds a buffer. It creates distance. Ironic detachment explains simply, it's feeling deeply, but disguising it as indifference. It's not that Gen X doesn't care, they care quietly, with a dry wit and a raised eyebrow. The twist? That same sarcasm that kept them safe can also keep them isolated. Honestly, if you've ever seen yourself in any of this so far, you're probably Gen X, or you know one. Might be worth sharing this with them. Just a thought. Disillusionment in the workplace. Why Gen X stopped drinking the Kool-Aid. When Gen X entered the workforce, they brought their Gen X personality traits with them: independence, skepticism, and a healthy side of don't trust authority. They'd watched their parents get laid off after decades of loyalty and saw corporate promises age about as well as a VHS tape. So they learned to keep a professional distance, often wrapped in humor and subtle cynicism. It wasn't bitterness, it was pattern recognition. Ask a Gen Xer how they really feel in a team meeting and they'll likely smirk before giving a diplomatic, dry reply. Not because they don't have thoughts, but because they've learned that transparency doesn't always reward honesty. It's the classic sarcasm explained moment. Say what you mean without sounding like you mean it. It's a protective instinct, one rooted in experience, not negativity. The cynical humor meaning here isn't defeat. It's a knowing nod to the game being played. Yet even in their detachment, Gen Xers often carry the weight of emotional labor. They're the ones quietly fixing things behind the scenes, mentoring without asking for credit, balancing trust issues with responsibility. And still, they might never say they're burned out. You'll just catch it in a sigh or a deadpan joke about living the dream. But here's where it gets fascinating. This ability to laugh while crumbling a bit inside, that's psychological resilience humor. And it speaks volumes about how Gen X handles stress, connection, and even their own mental health. So, what if all those sarcastic comebacks, dry one-liners, and ironic detachment weren't signs of emotional avoidance, but proof of survival? Gen X didn't get the luxury of open expression or safe spaces growing up. They got sitcoms, silence, and the constant background hum of figure it out yourself. And they did. Through humor, through grit, through building walls that let in just enough light to stay warm, but never enough to burn. Now ask yourself, how do you cope? When life gets overwhelming, do you armor up with a joke too? Do you mask pain with timing and delivery? And if you recognize that in yourself or someone you love, what would change if you saw it not as dysfunction, but as depth, as strength? That shift alone could unlock a new level of empathy for others and for yourself. And hey, if this video made you think or made you laugh a little while rethinking the meaning of that sarcastic smirk, stick around. There's a whole world behind that raised eyebrow, and we're just getting started. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, maybe even tap the bell so you don't miss what's next. Share this with someone who gets it, because Gen X might not say much, but they'll appreciate that you did.